Okay, I'm going to call to order the City Council meeting for October 17, 2017. If you could all stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Susie, if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Haskew.
Here.
Councilmember Silva.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Waddell.
Here.
Mayor Carlston.
Here.
And Councilmember Wilk is absent due to a planned vacation.
Okay, the first item that we have is a presentation from Contra Costa Transportation Authority regarding innovation of I-680.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Tim Hale, the Deputy Executive Director for Projects with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And so through many public workshops and the development of our countywide transportation plan, there was a lot of concerns about the growing congestion on the 680 corridor. And CCTA staff commissioned a report, the I-680 Transit Relief and Option Study, and it basically analyzed strategies to solve congestion and basically evolve in the 4 projects. And Innovate 680 is the next generation of mobility. Innovate 680 is a regional project. It's involving all of our partners along the corridor. And so we plan to go to the Regional Transportation Planning Committee meeting and identify folks to be part of our Policy Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee to guide the process and development of the project. Congestion on I-680 is primarily based on regional commuting and to and from the county, and based on everything we know due to the imbalance of jobs and housing in Contra Costa County. There are minimal through trips. Almost all of the trips are being generated in Contra Costa County, and so this makes it our problem to solve in Contra Costa. So 680 is the 8th worst commute in the Bay Area. The corridor is very transit poor. There's poor access to employment centers. There's a lack of physical space and funding to do any type of mega infrastructure project to fix the congestion along the corridor. And so if there's no improvements on 680, by the year 2020, the congestion and the commutes and the travel times are expected to quadruple. So as we continue to invest some key infrastructure projects to improve congestion on 680, such as the express lanes that just were opened last week and CCTA's southbound express lane project, we will not be able to continue to build ourselves out of congestion. So how do we improve mobility on 680? So through an integrated approach, 680 would maximize the efficiency of the 680 corridor through technology and become the first connected corridor in the Bay Area. So the goals of Innovate 680 is really 3 major goals. We want to make sure we focus on increasing person throughput through ride sharing and transit. Also have shared mobility and mode shift. So mode shift is changing people's travel behaviors to move from cars into transit into shared mobility options such as carpooling. So there have been several completed reports along the corridor. A design alternative assessment analyzed 9 alternatives along the corridor, as well as a bus on shoulder and ramp metering assessment along the corridor. So enhancing transit and technology was evaluated through the Transit Investment and Relief Study. And so the goal of Innovate 680 is to integrate all of these recommendations into these 7 strategies. So as we all know, weaving causes congestion and weaving causes friction along the corridor. So through these studies, we've identified several critical bottlenecks along the corridor. One is in Livorno Road, the other is at North Main Street. And so this is an example where we would actually braid traffic over Lawrence Way on-ramp. And so that would eliminate weaving and actually improve congestion in this particular area of the corridor. The second strategy is completing the express lane. So what we want to do is the express lanes that were just opened, we want to extend those express lanes in both the northbound and southbound direction all the way to the Benicia Martinez Bridge and complete the express lane network in Contra Costa County. So transit is probably the most efficient way to move people through the corridor. We want to make transit an attractive option so people can, to travelers. And so to meet our goal of mode shift, we need to provide reliable and efficient transit services in the corridor. We want to increase bus services from 1 to 2 per hour to 4 to 6 per hour. And then also by utilizing the shoulder for bus operations during peak hour, we'd be able to provide more reliable and efficient transit service in the corridor. So bus on shoulder only operates during congested peak periods, and buses would only be operating at 30 miles an hour or less. And we're anticipating that would be operating from Ignacio to Bollinger Canyon Road, where there's available shoulders and auxiliary lanes for buses to travel safely. So dedicated areas will be installed along the corridor for regular enforcement. Additional signage and technology will be provided with the bus drivers and the infrastructure so the bus drivers will know when there's vehicles in the shoulder and also when there's oncoming on-ramp traffic. So by moving the buses from the express lanes and also from the freeway lanes, it actually provides additional capacity for vehicles in the other lanes, thereby improving congestion. The fourth strategy is innovative operational strategies, and this will be the next generation of integrated corridor management. So think of a system that's able to collect data from the corridor, analyze that data, and actually use that data to change conditions on the facility in real time, so that way the system can be more predictive and be more efficient. And then we're also talking about a new generation of ramp metering, adaptive ramp metering that's coordinated across the entire corridor. Every single ramp will be talking to one another. And so by using this approach, there was a similar approach actually done in Australia on the M1. And using this similar approach, they were actually able to increase capacity by one additional lane without even widening the freeway. So just by managing congestion more efficiently on the corridor, you're able to get additional capacity in the corridor. And so we all know that the advent of technology and vehicles is coming, and so we want to prepare the corridor for that technology. So we want to put in dedicated short-range communication so that when you do purchase a vehicle with that kind of technology, the vehicles are able to communicate to the infrastructure and to each other. And then the other benefit of having that kind of technology is that in this particular graphic, the buses are in the shoulder, and so the buses would actually be able to communicate to the ramp meters. So the ramp meters would hold red at the cars, so that way the buses will be able to travel through the on-ramp safely. Another important strategy is first and last mile connectivity. So the corridor, you can manage it efficiently as possible, but getting people to the corridor is also important, and also getting people to and from employments that are along the corridor. So we want to implement on-demand mobility, the shared autonomous vehicle, and also shared mobility hubs throughout the corridor. So this will provide more connectivity to transit, make it more convenient, more accessible. And so Contra Costa County is also studying putting shared autonomous vehicles on the Iron Horse Trail along the corridor. So we need to encourage shared and on-demand mobility. And so with all of these strategies, we need to have options in terms of providing data to our travelers. And so what we want to do is we want to create a new Contra Costa 511 app. And so this will be able to provide data to all the travelers to be able to make daily decisions about the most efficient way to commute in the corridor. So it'll either be your car, biking, shared mobility options, shared autonomous vehicle, transit, BART. And so that way, and then would have the cost, the travel time savings, and then you'll be able to actually make and schedule your commute right directly through the app versus having to go to 5 or 6 other apps to be able to schedule your trip. So overall strategies has multiple benefits in the corridor. So there is travel time reduction, and it also will increase travel speeds along the corridor up to our average 60 to 65 miles per hour. And by using bus on shoulder operations and getting that more reliable transit and increasing bus services, that actually increases transit savings times to 13 minutes. And by taking the buses out of those freeway lanes and putting them on the shoulder, the single occupant and high occupant vehicles will actually realize also an additional travel time savings of 5 to 7 minutes. So preparing the corridor for the future for autonomous and connected vehicles and deployment of the shared autonomous vehicle through enhancing transit services will also result in safer roads, less congestion, and improved air quality. And by reducing congestion through these 7 strategies, Innovate 680 will improve accessibility and equity by providing better connectivity to jobs, goods, and services along the corridor. So Innovate 680 has never been done before. So how do we deliver the first connected corridor in the Bay Area? So we take these 7 strategies and develop these 4 projects. So the Advanced Technology Project will be all of the technologies in the corridor so that way they're coordinated and integrated. The Bus on Shoulders operation project will improve those shoulders and for all the traveling buses. And then the Express Lane project will extend those express lanes all to Benicia Martinez Bridge. And then the transit improvements, again, is key, but it'll include all these transit enhancements, the purchase of buses, and also improvements to park and ride facilities along the corridor. So this is our anticipated schedule. So in 2018-21, we expand our express lane network through our current CCTA express lane project that'll start construction next year. And then within the next 5 years, we want to complete the express lane network, implement the bus on shoulders, and also complete the advanced technology project. So the strategic plan amendment is actually going to our CCTA board tomorrow night for final approval. And so this strategic plan amendment has been approved by SWAT and TransPAC, and it'll provide $40 million in funding for the project in terms of delivery. And so the overall program is a $300 million investment in the entire corridor, and also these funds will be used to match additional state and federal funds. So we're also anticipating the $40 million will be fully fund planning and environmental for all of the 4 projects, and would also get these projects qualified for additional funding like SB1 Congested Corridor Program. But we also learned this week that we did not get selected for the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technology Deployment Grant. Say that fast 5 times. And so we're scheduling a debrief with US DOT. So I really appreciate the opportunity for being here and happy to take any questions.
Timothy, thank you very much for the fine presentation you made. Do any of us have any questions? Cindy?
I was very intrigued. Thank you for your presentation, and this is aspirational but very important, and hopefully we can achieve it. You had a slide where you talked about Lawrence Way. Can you go back and explain that again? Because I think I misheard. Therefore, I want to make sure I heard this right.
Bear with me for one moment. It's like the first strategy.
Right, exactly, of course. Cool corridor hotspots. So what are you proposing to do in lay language?
Okay, so right now we know that Lawrence Way is dumping all kinds of traffic onto the freeway, completely unmetered. And so and then what that does is because the exit ramp for Treat Boulevard is so close, you have basically all this traffic coming on and you have all this traffic trying to get off and you have all this weaving that's happening at that location. So all that weaving is causing congestion.
Okay.
And so what we're proposing here is that by taking the Treat Boulevard exit traffic and actually taking them off the freeway before the Lawrence Way traffic gets on. So you eliminate the weaving. So if you look to the right of the graphic where it says Treat Boulevard, left lane only, that is actually the exit lane for Treat Boulevard. So if you follow that orange line all the way to Treat Boulevard, and you'll notice these 2 black lines over the Lawrence Way traffic, that's a bridge. And so that bridge, that traffic will be bridged over the Lawrence Way on-ramp traffic. And so you wouldn't have these two movements conflicting anymore.
Okay, so there's a little label there that says City of Walnut Creek Corporation Yard planned relocation to Park Shadelands. I think you need to talk to our Public Works Department. Only a little tiny piece of that. You were just planning a flyover of an ongoing operation.
Yeah, we plan to coordinate with City of Walnut Creek staff as
You
we
think?
develop the project. Yes, yes. Yeah, this project is just starting.
All right. Okay,
This is just one of
That's
the
what I thought
this
I
is-
heard you say, and that's why I made you go back.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
is just one of the concepts that we're considering here.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Timothy? Not seen any. Thank you very much, Timothy, for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. Before we go to the next thing, I'd like to welcome the exchange students from Stuttgart, Germany here. If y'all could raise your hands so the city council can see the number of students that are here, and obviously their teachers. We have two of the, we have teachers as well. Okay, the next item is proclamation. Is Bruce Todd here? Bruce, I'll meet you up here. Bruce is from the California Healthy Workplace Advocates Organization, and we have a proclamation for Bruce, and I'll read most of it because it's relatively short. Whereas the City of Walnut Creek has an interest in promoting the social and economic well-being of its citizens, employees, and employers, and whereas that well-being depends upon the existence of healthy and productive employees working in safe and abuse-free work environments, and whereas research has documented the stress-related health consequences for individuals caused by exposure to abusive work environments. And then I'm going to skip down to the now therefore, I, Richard G. Carlston, Mayor of the City of Walnut Creek, on behalf of the City of Walnut Creek City Council, do hereby declare October 15th through 21st as Freedom from Workplace Bullies Week, and commend the California Healthy Workplace Advocates and their Workplace Bullying Institute, which raises awareness of impacts and solutions for workplace bullying in the U.S. Encourage all citizens to recognize the special observance. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bruce Todd, and I am a California workplace advocate. On their behalf, I would like to thank Mayor Carlston and the City Council for issuing this proclamation. Presently, to our national shame, the United States and the state of California have no laws prohibiting status-blind harassment in the workplace. It is perfectly legal to harass an employee or coworker until the job becomes unbearable and the workers are disabled. As many of you may be aware, the provisions prohibiting workplace harassment are limited to the protected classes such as sex, gender, nationality, etc. Walnut Creek's participation in Freedom from Workplace Bullies Week goes a long way in helping us to realize our mission to raise public awareness and to implore our state to correct and prevent abusive work environments through legislation. Our intent is to post all the proclamations we receive from cities, towns, and counties to both our website at bullyfreeworkplace.org and our Facebook page, and then take the proclamations to the state legislature. Our desire is to have our state representatives know their constituents believe all workers deserve a safe work environment and need a law to correct and prevent workplace bullying. Thank you again for your support. Any questions?
The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Do we have any public comment with respect to an item on the consent calendar? If you can identify yourself and then go ahead. 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Ralph Hoffman, and I'd like to comment on consent item 2E. With the fires that we've had in the North Bay, and got another fire in Santa Cruz Mountains here coming up, in the fire season, not over by a long shot yet, we have a tremendous additional housing problem and more and more homeless people. And I would strongly urge that in some way we can have some affordable units in 1950 and 1962 Trinity Avenue because it's so close to the BART station. It's BART proximate, and I understand there'll be 14 condos, and usually you get in lieu fees, but we really need the housing now. The first phase of the BART Transit Village will not have any more housing. It's to the second or third stages it'll have the housing, and it's a ways off yet before places like St. Paul's Commons will be built. So we really need to look into, and I suggest you look at the attachment 2 in this consent item. There are 2 bus stops with no bench or shelter close by, and I would also suggest that those bus stops have a bench or shelter, and if you put a shelter in, the developer could pay for that. That the developer can advertise on a bus shelter, and those buses would be the County Connection Routes 1 and 301, operating 7 days a week. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Any other public comments with respect to the consent calendar? Not seen any. I'll close the consent calendar and ask if anybody would like to pull any item from the consent calendar.
I would like to get clarification on that last item because I believe the project is actually, the site work is actually going on and is fully entitled, but I would like to get confirmation on that.
Good evening, council members. Ethan Bindernagel, Planning Manager. I'm sorry, if you could, I missed I didn't have the agenda in front of me. I apologize.
Consent calendar item 2E references the final subdivision map for 1950 and 1962 Trinity Avenue. I believe that project, the site development work is underway and
Correct.
the project is fully, has received all of its entitlements.
It has been entitled. It is it's going through the permitting process. Site development underway, building permit under review.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I am happy to move approval of the consent calendar items 2A through H with the amended minutes for item 2B.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, Susie, if we could have a roll call.
Councilmember Silva?
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Waddell?
Aye.
And Mayor Carlson?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Next item is item number 3, public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the council cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. If you're going to be speaking, we need to have a speaker card filled out and provided to our clerk, Susie Martinez. First, please.
Ralph Hoffman again. You notice I'm dressed in my Snappy Cats uniform, and I'm not going to be singing today. And of course, we don't sing political songs at Snappy Cats anyhow, but we're at risk of having to end Snappy Cats after the end of the year because of low membership. And we're going to have a birthday social that we'll be singing at this coming Friday. And anyone over 50 can join the senior center, and we go to senior residence facilities to sing, and it really cheers them up, because a lot of these people in residence facilities have dementia, some form of dementia, and yet they remember the songs of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It cheers them up and makes us feel good that we're cheering them up too. So I know a few of you are over 50 maybe, and you're welcome to come and even join us singing. The other thing I want to mention in the limited time available is my mask here. This is a spare the air day today and tomorrow too. I mean, the worst air is in the North Bay, but as I said, the fire season is not over yet. It really affects senior citizens and young children who have breathing problems. Oh, there's a whole list of possible. Usually spare the air days are because of high ozone or CO2 or something, but particulates from fires are what makes my throat raspy. And people with respiratory problems, asthma, COPD, emphysema, and heart disease are very likely to be impacted. And when it gets really bad, we should have some kind of a face mask on. This isn't the best kind, but it'll help. So we really need to pay attention to all the effects of bad air through this fall fire period. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Next, please.
He speaks German, that's why they clapped. Okay, so I'm going to talk about arson and fires, because I'm totally fed up. And
Pete,
then I'm going to talk about...
Pete, could you identify yourself first?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Pete Bennett. My Twitter account is Peter C. Bennett. My blogs are pgwitness.com. TheSerialArsonist.com is coming out pretty soon. And I'm going to talk about this fire 13 years ago that before I came along, that fire was right behind Los Lomas High School. About 3 years ago, an article came out, and this same picture from a different angle. I lost 3 seconds there. That's my friend and her daughter. Now, Geneva would have graduated Los Lomas High School this year. Only they ended up dead up in a murder-suicide up in Sonoma. Now, you've heard me say this before, and I'm really eternally frustrated with this, because I think I know the attorney walking there in the pipe next to the explosion, who shared an office with my attorney that was burned down here in 2001. And if you want even more complicated, I was in a lawsuit with the Russians when they burned down my attorney's office. Yeah, that's true. I've been dealing with these guys for a long time. That was 2001. I had fires in my cabinet shop in the 80s. My F-250 blows up on the freeway. I'm nearly beaten to death by a Danville building inspector named Gary Vincent Collins. Some people in this room here know his widow. I'm perturbed. So I'm going to give this to you, and I hope that you read it, because Joe Driscoll was driving or involved in the explosion. And Commander George Driscoll is Alicia's other brother, connected to the narcotics guys that are connected to my explosion. How can I go 13 years without an investigation? Now, I know things are going on, but I'm going to give you another piece of information. I've been holding this back for a while, but the fires in Santa Rosa bother me beyond belief. The one down in Santa Cruz, you know about the East Bay System Authority tower that fell down, that somebody cut the wires. The same thing's going down in Southern California in Wilson Mountain, Mount Wilson. They're going after, there's a fire underneath the power towers. The same thing happened in Moraga. It happens too often. It's a pattern. So this guy here, I lost $1 million. His name is Rick Kopp. He's a Mormon attorney down in Danville. He's friends with District Attorney Mark Peterson's brother, Michael Peterson. And here's what I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I got 16 seconds to tell you. Officer Ray Giacomelli killed my black employee in 1982, and District Attorney Mark Peterson is living with the widow of Ray. I got it all. 30 years, 40 years. That's how long I've been going through it. 3 60-second intervals. That's all I get.
Thanks, Pete. Next, please.
I don't really need this, but I'll use it anyway. Good evening. Thank you for having us. We are. My name is Nancy Grabo. I'm the German teacher at Northgate High School, and I am the very proud presenter of the German group. We are sponsoring 20 young people from a town right near Stuttgart called Filderstadt with the GAP program, the German American Partnership Program. It's sponsored by the American and the German governments. It's a chance for young people to come and live here. They're staying with families at Northgate. They're going to school. They're sitting through my German lessons. Lucky them. And they're getting to know our culture and the way we go to school and practicing their English. And then I and another Northgate teacher will take these same Northgate students to Germany next summer, right after school is out. And our Northgate students will stay with the people who are staying with them now, so they know each other, and my students will get to practice their German and get to know their culture. And it's an astonishing program, and I thought that maybe the Walnut Creek City Council would like to know that that's what's going on at Northgate High School. We really appreciate the mayor coming to our welcome breakfast yesterday, but I'm boring to listen to, so I'm going to introduce 2 students. We have an American student who is hosting a student. His name is Cade Walrat. He's in my German 3 class. He's going to come up and tell you why he's doing this.
Thank you, Nancy.
I'm Cade Walrath. I'm a student at Northgate High School in the German 3 class and a participant in the GAP exchange program. I signed up for the program because I was really interested in, exploring other cultures, improving my German, and broadening my horizons. My family has opened up our house for a German exchange partner, and they will return the favor come summer when we visit Germany. So far in my life, I've never set a foot in Germany, and I know so much about the culture already.
Thank you, Kate. So that's the Northgate side, and now we have a German student who's going to tell you why she wanted to be part of this program.
Hello, my name is Noemi Brumbach, and I'm from Germany. And I applied for the exchange because, you're able to get experiences for your life you will never forget in your entire life. And these experiences will help you to get more open-minded and more independent. And thank you to all people which made that possible for us.
So we appreciate your time. We hope you have, we're going to have our German students stay for a little while to see how city government runs. I hope you will not hold it against us that they leave after about 20 minutes or so. They have a date with the California Pizza Kitchen because we want to support the library fundraiser. And we didn't want to take up too much of your time. So they're going to leave after about 20 minutes. I have to leave right now because my son goes to Las Lomas and he has his first concert tonight. So welcome to my world. We appreciate you sharing your world a little bit with us. Thank you very much and have a great night.
Thank you very much. And all of the students that are Northgate that are going to Germany will have a fabulous time. Having lived in Germany for 3 years, they're wonderful people, wonderful country, and it'll be a terrific experience for each of you. Please.
Hi, my name is Anna Rickelman, and my daughter attends Northgate High School. She's actually part of the GAP program for the 2nd year now. Knowing that my daughter attends Northgate High School, I spend a lot of time in sales tax dollars in Walnut Creek. And I wanted to take a minute, since I was here with the program, to just say something about the roads in Walnut Creek, and in particular one road, Walnut Avenue. Don't worry, it's good. I just wanted to say that the improvements along Walnut Avenue look absolutely great. It's unbelievable, the way the asphalt looks rehabbed in the striping. But more than that, I'm amazed at how super reflective that road is in the evening. In fact, every time I'm down that road in the evening, dropping off, one of my kids' friends or picking up my daughter or something like that, I actually say, wow, this road looks really great. I feel very safe when I'm driving it as often as I drive Walnut Avenue late at night. And I understand through Ms. Ballinger that the city folks to thank for this are Scott Wickstrom, Joe Sadri, and Alex Wong. So thank you all. The road looks great and safe for those late night travelers like myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Any other members of the public wish to comment? Not seeing any, I'm going to close public comment, and we'll move to item number 4, council member and staff announcements, reports on activities or requests. Do we have
Mr.
any?
Mayor, there were no reportable action from closed session this evening.
City manager report?
Yeah, good evening, Dan Buckshire, City Manager. I wanted to provide an update with respect to the fires that were occurring in Napa and Sonoma counties. And first, I wanted to state, I think I can speak safely on behalf of everybody here, that our sympathies do go out to the tens of thousands of folks who have been impacted and will continue to be so for many months and years to come. And that does include some of our own staff as well that were dealing with the fires this past week. What I wanted to focus on is more specific to Walnut Creek and what we've done and what some of the impacts were here locally. We did receive a mutual aid request to send some support staff. We have had about 10 employees that were dispatched to the area, primarily law enforcement, but also some support for the Emergency Operations Center. It's likely we will receive more requests, and we will certainly try to accommodate those requests with the overall goal of balancing, helping out our neighbors, and continuing to run our operations here responsibly as well. I should note that because these requests are coming through mutual aid, Walnut Creek will eventually be reimbursed for these costs associated with sending the support. I think as everybody here is well aware, the air quality was at unhealthy levels this past week, and will likely vacillate over the next several days as the fires continue. We may have additional air quality issues, but we did take some actions. We canceled several outdoor recreational activities last week and closed the open space that was based upon advice from the district as well as county public health to limit outdoor activity. I'm sure as Ms. Silva will speak in more detail, the outdoor activities for Community Service Day were rescheduled to October 21st and the 28th. More to follow on that. Oktoberfest on Saturday was canceled as well. So certainly some impacts here, but pale in comparison to what others have been dealing with. Received a lot of inquiries about what is Walnut Creek doing to prepare, given that we're still in the height of fire season. We've been in regular contact with the Contra Costa County Fire Chief. As folks are likely aware here, we have a centralized fire service. They are fully staffed. They've been on high alert, even though they're providing some support to the North Bay as well. The staffing levels are high here. The biggest point that the fire chief noted, which I think bears repeating, is what we can all do is be fire aware and fire safe for the foreseeable future, at least until we start getting some rains here and fire season wanes. Additionally, we updated the city website to include information about the fire as well as opportunities for individuals to help, whether it be donations or through volunteer services. There are a list of organizations that have been recognized by the local communities that are providing direct support. And then lastly, I'd like to point out that while the emergency response will hopefully end here soon as the fires are contained, the recovery effort will last for many months and likely many years into the future. And so we will be in regular touch with Napa and Sonoma for how we can support those efforts, and I would encourage individuals to do the same.
Thank you, Dan. Why don't we go to city council reports? Cindy, you want to start today?
Where is he?
He always gets to go first.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I will start with a couple of reports of regional meetings. The mayor and I are the representatives of the City Council on the board of Central Contra Costa Solid Waste Authority, which is also known as Recycle Smart. Recycle Smart is the agency that contracts with Republic Services for our garbage recycling and organic services. And in a recent meeting, we were discussing rates for the coming rate year, which is basically March through February. And it looks to be a small
increase would be recommended consistent with the consumer price index for the local Bay Area. But more to follow on that. It isn't definitive. On behalf of the City Council, I attended last week's October meeting of Walnut Creek Downtown. Of course, they were in a flurry of activity getting ready for Oktoberfest. And then, unfortunately, about 36 hours later, they had to make the decision to cancel it, which was a financially significant decision that they had to make because many contracts were already underway and payments for promotion had already been made. But I think they made the right decision, and I know they do as well. They also are working on, their task force is working on recommendations to their board on the Prop 64 issues related to the recreational marijuana. The North Downtown Specific Plan work continues, and the next advisory committee meetings are Monday, November 6th and Monday, November 13th. We will be talking about a lot of details based on the input that came from the Transportation Commission and the Planning Commission in August and the Council in September. And those two meetings will be at 6 p.m. each of those 2 Mondays, and they will be on the 3rd floor of City Hall, so straight above us. The elevator's out in the lobby. I will mention, since we had some visitors from Germany, some high school students today, our Walnut Creek Sister Cities International has a program called the Youth Ambassador Exchange. It's for 8th grade students, and 21 Walnut Creek 8th grade students went to Noceto, Italy, and Schiavok, Hungary in the first week of October, and on their exchange, and those Italian and Hungarian students that they stayed with will be visiting us in April. And lastly, I will mention Community Service Day. It was slated for this last Saturday, and due to the unhealthy air quality conditions, we actually made a decision to hold 3 Community Service Saturdays. So last Saturday, we had 15 indoor projects, and we had more than 400 volunteers on those 15 projects. More than 200 people were really in our 2 libraries, cleaning books, cleaning tables, cleaning shelves, cleaning the media. The mayor was in the media section of the downtown library. And we also had people in places like the Bedford Gallery making seat cushions for visitor benches.
No, bench cozies.
Bench cozies. All right, they're covers for the benches.
Mm-hmm.
And so those 400 people accomplished a lot in a short period of time. In addition, during that day, we actually collected 8,600 pounds of food for the food bank. That's twice as much as we typically collect on a community service day. And in large part, that was because people were understanding that if they gave food contributions non-perishable to our local Contra Costa Solano food bank, that we would warehouse them locally here, and then that food would be deployed as it is needed in the North Bay as well. So all of these food banks are interconnected across the region. And I would like to really give a shout out for our Public Works and Arts and Recreation staff for what they helped us do to turn the ship from Thursday morning until Saturday morning, because we moved a whole bunch of stuff. And we are now going to have Community Service Day Part 2 this Saturday, October 21st. There are 5 projects, mostly at schools in the Ignacio Valley area. And Part 3 will be on Saturday, October 28th, and there will be 23 projects that day. So in case you couldn't come this last Saturday, there's lots of opportunity to volunteer, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Luella?
Yep. So I went to the Transpac meeting last 2 Thursdays ago, 2 Thursdays ago, and actually heard the program that you heard today about the Innovate I-680. But we did more at Transpac. We, as you might have heard, we did reallocate money so that we could fund that. We also reallocated some money for the excess money from the Clayton projects for their main roads. We reallocated money so they could continue the projects that they had planned, and Martinez worked out an agreement with the county, who says we don't get along, to move some of the money that was for a county project into their project as well. I am reminded to remind you that the I-680 Express Lane is all those signs that said don't pay any attention to me. you need to pay attention to them. Now they are express lanes and not HOV lanes. And you do need a fast pass, and you need the new fast passes that have the clicker that lets you show how whether you qualify as a HOV vehicle, high occupancy vehicle, and if you do, you don't have to pay the toll. But if you don't have that fast pass and you can't click the clicker, you could get charged for the transportation if you get in that lane. So it's important that you get that. And I understand there's we had one, our family had one, but it turns out there's a new, more modern, smaller one. So if you want to get it in, you turn in your old passes to Fast Pass, and there you are. They also talked about a website for numbers wonks and for people who want to know what we think the Bay Area is going to look like in a few years. There is a website on the MTC website, which is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, called Vital Signs. It's vitalsigns.mtc.ca.gov, and you can see some pretty amazing statistics about how we anticipate the Bay Area to grow. That's it for Owen. Tomorrow I get to hear the I-680 thing tomorrow at CCTA.
May I ask you a question?
Oh, sure, please do.
So for all of those who now suddenly realize we need to exchange our fast passes, where do we do that? I bought mine at Safeway, so I don't think I'm going back to Safeway.
You can send it into MTC, and they'll issue the new one.
Okay.
And my spouse is a Costco shopper, and he points out you can buy the new ones at Costco, so you can even get them, I think, at some kind of discount. So there you are.
Okay, I'm going to go next. A couple of things. There's a website that grades livability of different cities with respect to retirement, and it's referred to as livability.com, rather obvious. And Walnut Creek has been identified as the #1 city in the United States for retirement and retirees to live. I know Dan talked a lot about the fires and the help that needs to be done. Please visit. We want to thank everybody who's already provided assistance with respect to those fires. This is going to be an ongoing thing. It's going to take time to recover. And don't forget that they're going to need assistance a month from now, 6 months from now, and be generous with respect to what you can do. I want to also...
Excuse me, Mayor. I point out that the city does have a website that people can go to that's related to the Walnut Creek website, and it has lots of information.
Yeah, there are lots of different places you can go. The city has a website that was put up. I think Dan mentioned that. But please keep our thoughts and actions in benefit of the Northern California people. I want to let you know that the city has received the second payment of a $375,000 grant from the Dean and Margaret Lesher Foundation. And this past couple of weeks, we had a Safe Routes to School presentation that a number of the city council members attended. It's absolutely, I went to Foothill. It was absolutely fabulous to see those little kids. So Luella was at Foothill. Cindy, you were at Walnut Acres and walked to Foothill. And Kevin was there as well. It's fun to see the little kids walk in and taking their bikes. And it was a culmination of a project that was first brought to the attention of the city by the neighborhood. Our staff did an incredible job of working with it. And now everybody has a much better way for the kids to get to those two schools. And I know that there's still stuff that has to be done. I know Steve is aware of that, and the city is going to continue to work on that. I was privileged to go with Heather on a San Ramon Creek bypass channel tour. What I want to focus on there is the importance of staying out of the stormwater channel. And I know that the schools under which the channel goes have a program, I believe it's this week, where they emphasize that you don't want to be in the channel. But again, just an important thing to identify. And I would like to know what a seat cushy is.
Cozy. I actually wanted to know what it was when I was assigned the project. It turns out that we have some really extraordinarily beautiful new benches in the gallery. They're worth going to see because they're a piece of art, and the job was to come up with something so that they could cover the benches when they install and uninstall the exhibits. So and to protect them so that they don't have any damage. And I had two. I got so lucky there. One was Marie and one was Teresa, and they took the what we had pre-planned and they made it even better. And so they will not likely ever be seen by the public, but they are quite artful in their own way.
Thank you. I wasn't sure what that was. Obviously, I had the wrong word, too. Okay, we're going to move now to item number 5, public hearing. First item is amend the city's wireless communication facilities ordinance to provide an exemption from the provisions of the ordinance for small cell antenna facilities subject to certain conditions and specified in the amendment. And Cindy, is this next one? Okay. So if we get a report, please.
Good evening, Mayor Carlston and members of council. My name is Ethan Bindernagel. I'm planning manager for the city of Walnut Creek, and I am here to present to you tonight a proposed amendment to the city's wireless communication facilities ordinance to specifically exempt small cell antenna installations from the provisions of our ordinance, or most provisions of our ordinance, going forward. Now, this all came to light, I think, and there are two reasons that we're proposing this, one of which relates to some work that has been ongoing here at the city, and the second is in response to some work that the legislators were doing up in Sacramento. I have a very short presentation. I'd be happy to yield to any questions you may have, but I'd like to at least start off with our existing process in case for those who are not familiar with it. As our ordinance outlines, typically within 300 feet of a residentially zoned property, any wireless facility proposed in or within 300 feet of a residentially zoned property requires a use permit. If you're outside that boundary in a commercial area, let's say, beyond 300 feet of a residentially zoned property, simply requires design review, typically handled at staff level. However, if you are a monopole as defined in the ordinance, which is typically a pole of 17 feet or higher or greater height, you are required, no matter if you're in or within or outside a residentially zoned parcel, you require both a use permit and design review. Last Thursday at the Planning Commission, one such monopole was proposed at Boundary Oak, was approved, but that was going through our existing process. We noted in our blueprint for success that this process can be rather cumbersome, and as I noted in the staff report, this is a 20-plus year ordinance that's been on the books, and of course in the last 20 to 25 years, the wireless industry and telecommunications in general have changed a great deal. That said, as a lead-in, the state legislature, perhaps under the influence of other forces, proposed a bill, SB 649, and there was plenty of lobbying on both sides, but the bill was to exempt or would apply to small cell installations within the right-of-way or within commercial and industrial zones. Provisions specifically would prohibit discretionary approval, in other words, local control out the window, so to speak, subject only to the encroachment or building permit as issued as required, and there were limitations on how much the city could charge for these installations. Now, of course, that was vetoed on Sunday, a day before it might have become law, by Governor Brown, who vetoed the measure, and in his language cited, in essence, the balance between local control and the need for a better balance between local control and the needs of the industry. Now, there was a provision within, and I want to step back just quickly to say, staff understanding that this bill and thinking this bill was coming down the track, we've been working since June with carriers, wireless carriers, to identify opportunities, if exist, to, as this slide shows, take advantage of a provision within that law, as had been proposed and adopted, passed, approved by the legislature. It would preserve existing agreements. Well, maybe we should explore an agreement. And so we engaged over the last 6 months, we engaged wireless carriers to say, is there an interest in a lease agreement? There was, and we continue to have those discussions. And of course, there was an artificial time clock there that Should the law become effective on January 1st, we'd have to get something ahead of that to meet that requirement. Of course, that was vetoed as part of the legislation. But it didn't stop our efforts, because we think, staff believes, there's still an opportunity here to pursue potentially an agreement or other provisions, including perhaps at least streamlining a bit of our ordinance, a piece as it relates to small cells. Now, what are small cells? These are good and bad examples. And it can kind of, I think in a couple of pictures here, it can run the gamut in terms of the breadth of the impact or perceived visual impact. And you can see from the smattering of photos I found online, these can take various forms. And so staff is mindful of this. We are aware of this. We have been engaging the carriers to identify those installations we'd prefer not to see in Walnut Creek, you could probably guess, versus those we would encourage and like to see. And so we've been working mindfully with pictures like this in our minds to work on design considerations and other conditions that we would include in an agreement. Now, as I said, this also kind of dovetails, or it's linked with an effort undertaken over the last couple of years, actually now. The staff has undertaken the Blueprint for Success, which Council signed off on and accepted last November. Specifically, Action 2.4G would expedite telecom permitting. And as we identified and noted in the blueprint, it can be a cumbersome process currently. Well, this exemption, as we identified, keeping in mind the time clock we were under, et cetera, we said, let's seize the opportunity, let's amend our ordinance, and that is the proposal before you today. I'd like to emphasize the context within which we bring this to you. Not only is this sort of amendment consistent with the blueprint, it also would, as you can see in the last 30 days, we've received 31 applications for small cell antennas, all of which would require use permits, which requires public hearings, which requires 31 resolutions from our Planning Commission, which, as you can imagine, is quite a bit of work, both for staff, for the commission, for the carriers. And so we said, well, there may be an opportunity. And again, that's the spirit within which we have pursued this ordinance amendment. Now, I know that there are a couple of, or at least there was one letter received, and before I go to next steps, we'd just like to touch upon there were some changes at the dais with respect to the ordinance. Mayor Carlston emailed earlier to notice minor discrepancy. Apologies for the clerical error. That was on my mistake. We have corrected that, and I believe you have copies of it before you at the dais. We also received some correspondence from a member, Director of Government Affairs at Comcast, Mr. Ken Maxey, who cited an interest in making sure that the language as proposed in your ordinance this evening, the amendment, is clear and could not be misconstrued. And so if you're interested, we do have copies of that language to address his concerns available at the dais that was drawn up by the city attorney. Those being the points I wanted to call attention to, I would just like to close regarding next steps. Of course, we're here this evening for our first reading. I'm happy to answer any questions. Should Congress waive further reading and proceed, we would return for a second reading November 7th with an effective date of this change taking effect in early December. And again, I want to be clear why we're doing this. It would allow us to pursue an agreement, which both carriers, AT&T and Verizon, have expressed interest in. But the current ordinance does not allow us to entertain an agreement, doesn't allow the city to entertain an agreement of that sort. And so making the change to the ordinance would allow us to pursue that. Of course, now the timeframe is a bit different. So there's not necessarily a rush to complete this by year's end, but there is at least impetus to move forward, given the blueprint's direction and also the work we've done to date. That said, our recommendation is that the City Council adopt the proposed zoning ordinance amendment as included. And with that, I'll yield and be happy to answer any questions.
See, do we have any questions?
Yes.
Cindy, you want to start?
Yes.
I have a question as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ethan. So the agreement that we would be able to enter into with the carriers would be specific to those small cell facilities in our public right-of-way or on public property. Is that correct?
Partially. A master lease agreement would apply to city-owned infrastructure, which of course is in the right-of-way, but would not apply to, say, wood poles owned by PG&E. We have no control over those, we don't own them, and therefore any agreement between PG&E and the carriers would be subject to their agreements, which I'm sure are in place.
So the master lease agreement is truly only applicable to those city infrastructure?
Correct.
Light poles, signal standards?
Yes.
Is that
That
the
is
bulk
the
of what
idea.
we're really talking about?
Yes.
And so design standards then would become a part of the master lease agreement?
They would.
So what are some of the design standards, if you can go back to the photograph?
Sure.
What are some of the design standards we're having a conversation with the carriers about?
I will give you one guess. No, we are looking specifically at installations that would represent the picture on the far right. We're looking to avoid those sorts of installations to the extent possible. We are mindful that there are some other rules at play on PG&E poles that relate to overhead wires and some other requirements from PG&E and also the California Public Utilities Commission. We acknowledge that at staff level. However, we also acknowledge that we have an ordinance in place and that we have the intent of that ordinance to preserve, and we'd like to do so through design conditions attached to an agreement. And so we've been in some fruitful conversations, I think, with at least one of the carriers, and we're moving ahead subject to council's direction this evening.
So the master lease agreement that would be authorized in the changes in the ordinance would be only applicable to city-owned infrastructure, and so does that mean the process would only be streamlined for those installations, or are we also looking at a means to streamline installations within our right-of-way?
We would be looking to streamline installations of specifically small cell antennas as defined within the right-of-way, whether it's on city-owned infrastructure or non-city-owned infrastructure.
Okay, so that's where in the right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
And how large are these and how frequently do they occur along the streets?
Sure. How large are they? They can vary, as you can see. They can vary in their installation based upon location, based upon density of surrounding areas, based upon some, and I want to be clear, I'm not a representative of the industry. I simply have had meetings with them and have heard their arguments or explanations. Some locations within neighborhoods or otherwise require battery backup units, which can be a bit bulky and larger. And so there are some questions about that, whether they're ground mounted, pole mounted, or whatnot. Also, depending upon their location and how often they are located along, say, a certain street or within a neighborhood, unlike other, let's say, DAS systems or other systems that require the repetition of a signal from pole to pole so that the poles have to see each other, these poles, my understanding is, don't need to see each other. They are connected by fiber to what are called macro sites, the larger sites that we typically have seen with the 6-foot panel antennas, typically 9 on an array, the larger variety of antennas. These are smaller, they're more surgical in their placement, and they are connected to those macros, and they are along a broader, they're not repetitive regularly. They're more strategically installed and deployed by carriers to address network capacity issues. And I apologize I didn't touch on that earlier. That is the driver for the industry in terms of seeking to pursue deployment of small cells.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I had a couple of questions for you. Ethan, the section 2 of the ordinance talks in terms of CEQA, and it has a provision under the first bullet, no large-scale development could have a significant impact. What's your meaning for the large-scale development? Does that include just one particular siting, or does that also include numerous smaller sightings within an area?
Each application is, each of the 31 applications we have received by definition, by nature, are small with respect to their build-out. We're not talking, for example, of a multifamily or a new commercial enterprise or something, and therefore we would not consider those as, in the same vein as we would, say, a larger development. So the small cells as individual applications have, in our estimation, limited impact and therefore would be exempt from CEQA.
Okay. So you've considered the idea that somebody might, over time, put in a very large number of these?
We have.
Okay. I'm going to follow up on one of Cindy's questions. I think you indicated that for a PG&E pole, since we don't own the pole, then PG&E is the one that negotiates with the provider. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Now, each of these providers presumably is going to put some sort of a device within the right-of-way or within our property, which will allow us to have an agreement with them.
Mm-hmm.
is it the staff's intent that those agreements will go beyond just the placements within the right-of-way, but they will control the placements throughout the city? Or has that been considered?
If I understand, if I get a little bit of help perhaps from the city attorney on that.
Let me rephrase it.
I'm sorry.
You see the picture on the far right?
Correct.
If that's a PG&E pole, I just assumed we didn't have that in the city. And one of the ways I think that you can do that is through these master agreements, restrict the type of device that would be put anywhere in the city as a contractual obligation as opposed to a legal right.
Correct. There is code, government code, or perhaps not government code, but utilities, and I see the city attorney looking to opine, but my understanding is that there are legally provided opportunities for utilities and others to provide infrastructure within the right-of-way, and we cannot prohibit that through contractual obligations or some other agreement, as my understanding, but perhaps the city attorney could.
We can't charge a fee for those, so, sorry. The ordinance that's before you tonight says that if they're gonna locate the small cell facility on a city-owned pole, a city-owned structure, then we can charge for that. But if they have other equipment that is gonna be attached to a PG&E pole, we can't charge them just for the use of the right-of-way. We're prohibited by state law from doing that because they're telephone corporations by definition, and they have a right to be able to put equipment within the right-of-way. Mayor, to your question, however, both the ordinance places limitations on sizes of the equipment, both on the pole and on the ground, and the master lease agreement, if we have one for our own facilities, can include additional information into it in terms of being able to, in the most direct sense, avoid the example that's on the far right of this. So it may be that we have to allow them enough cumulative square feet of equipment to be able to operate it, but they wouldn't have the absolute right to just put it all on the side of a pole. Some of it may have to go on the ground, some of it may have to go on the pole. That's the way to be exempt from our ordinance right now, you have to meet the maximum size requirements that are set forth in the ordinance. Otherwise, you go through a normal process for an approval.
Okay, but can the agreement, which really applies to our property, can the provider contractually agree not to do anything different on another pole than what they're doing on the poles on our property?
Well, they can, and Ethan, I'd ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, because you have more conversation with them. The intent of the master lease agreement is to give them the right to be on many facilities if they choose to be city-owned facilities. And for those ones that are covered by the master lease agreement, you can have the design standards that you would want, provided that our design standards don't inhibit their ability to actually operate their systems. So we couldn't have design standards that effectively negate their ability to operate.
But if we negotiated the agreement so that those same design standards would apply to the PG&E pools within the city of Walnut Creek, and they agreed to it, then we would have contractual ability to enforce those standards.
No, I would say, no, our lease agreement will cover our facilities. Our design standards, so the ordinance itself covers all of the facilities, and our ordinance does have maximum size requirements, but the lease agreement itself can only apply to our facilities. We can't impose an additional requirement on property that we're not leasing to them. This would be a lease that they would have with PG&E, or some kind of rental arrangement or arrangement with PG&E to utilize PG&E's facilities.
So we can't enter into an agreement with one of the providers that says you're going to comply with our standards for any other one that you place in the city of Walnut Creek. If they agreed to it, what would prohibit us from doing that?
Well, we're not leasing them the property that you're trying to restrict the use of. That's actually PG&E's property. Our ordinance would control the other facilities in terms of the maximum size, but it wouldn't have the same control that we would have under the property that we lease directly, because we're acting in our when we're leasing the property, we're really acting more in our proprietary capacity rather than our regulatory capacity. But the ordinance has two components to it. It has the lease, which is us acting in our proprietary capacity. We have greater discretion. And it also has the maximum size requirements, which is really the city acting in its regulatory fashion and regulatory authority. And so I think, I don't know, Ethan, if you want to add to that.
Well, I'd like to add to that in terms of the regulatory piece. We are not by any means turning a blind eye to non-city-owned infrastructure, wood poles or otherwise. We are requiring an encroachment permit. And as part of that encroachment permit, design standards are attached. So there would be still, in order to have an encroachment permit issued, we would still expect that the design standards would be met much like they would within a master lease agreement. I think the key between the two, if I may offer, is that a master lease agreement involves potentially a source of revenue and some other considerations, but the design standards would apply uniformly, and the source of that is the wireless ordinance that we're trying to streamline, but we're trying to be mindful of the intent, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Any other questions?
So let me see if I clarify that. So now I see three categories. I see city-owned infrastructure. I see other infrastructure in our right-of-way, and then I see other infrastructure that's on private property.
And this is why the ordinance specifically addresses installation within the public right-of-way. It doesn't apply to residentially zoned properties where you may want to install a small cell. I have been told by industry representatives they have no interest in installing small cells on residential sites.
But it could be commercial property downtown. That's not in our right-of-way.
It could be. And
Flagpole on top of a
correct.
building.
Correct, and then it would be subject to our ordinance. For installation within the right-of-way, you may be exempt. So therefore, it may be advantageous to look for locations within the right-of-way.
Okay, so the streamlining that we're talking about is for either on our city-owned facilities or on privately owned facilities on the public right-of-way.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the key.
Thank
there.
you.
Okay, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment at this time on this issue?
Ralph Hoffman, one last time. You know, I think our country is going cell phone crazy with distracted drivers and distracted walkers, and a lot of pedestrians are getting killed because of that problem. And also, at church, we'd get fined if our cell phones went off during church. You can put them on mute. I thought I heard a cell phone ring a little while ago here from the audience.
Hey, it wasn't mine this time.
But if I had my cell phone here, and now that the German high school students have left, I would say, Bier hier, oder ich fall In München steht ein Hofbräuhaus, 1, 2, super. I hope the Oktoberfest will be rescheduled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Carlson, members of the council. My name is Ken Mintz. I'm here representing AT&T. First, I want to thank you for considering these exemptions for small cells within your wireless ordinance. And I want to thank particularly Ethan for his work on the city's behalf and working with industry as well. I just had a couple of quick things that I would like to ask about in terms of maybe some possible additions or suggestions for these amendments. We fully agree in terms of encroachment permits being appropriate for any of these structures within the right-of-way, whether on city-owned facilities or other facilities within the right-of-way. We would ask, however, Section 7-1.205 of the City Code requires encroachment permittees to commence construction within 90 days. We need somewhat longer lead times for small cell constructions, possibly as much as a year. So we'd like you to consider amending Section 10 to include a longer time frame for actually commencing construction of these types of facilities. We'd also like to see the city add the ability to file batch applications because many times we're talking about a number of different locations for these small cells. keep in mind that these are much, much lower power facilities than what you get with the large macro type sites that you see on towers and sides of buildings. Their coverage is more in the range of about 1,500 feet, for instance. And we use them currently and going forward to really help densify the signal for these, for particular neighborhoods or particular areas downtown. So the opportunity to batch these would be important to us. Another thing is when we get to the master license agreement for city-owned facilities, we really would like the city to consider the types of provisions that Senate Bill 649 did lay out, particularly setting standards for provisions for fees, rules, and processes. And finally, there was one item here that talked about the carriers having to absorb total costs if the city were to change locations for a particular facility. We'd like the city to consider helping to absorb those costs, particularly when we're talking about discretionary changes. So if the city is just saying we want something moved, we would hope that the city would help absorb some of those discretionary costs, not put all total costs onto the to the providers. Thank you very much. I'm available for answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ken. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll bring it back to the council for any comments.
I have questions of staff based on the public
That's fine.
comment, and I could not find the items being referenced by Mr. Mintz.
No, they weren't.
I believe there was a reference to a different section, chapter 7, Title 7, which is the Public Works section. We are addressing Title 10, which is the zoning, planning and zoning section of the municipal code. We are proposing amendment to Title 10, not to Title 7.
So the comments that Mr. Mintz was providing were all in reference to another section of the code?
Yes, I believe so. I cited Title 7.
I think it was just the first comment.
Pardon me, yes. With respect to encroachment permits and the time afforded or allotted for the installation within the right-of-way?
Okay.
Or as part of an encroachment permit?
The reference to batching the applications?
I was a bit, not perplexed, but if the projects were, if small cells were exempt, we certainly could think about batching encroachment permits, or if they were part of a master lease agreement, they would be handled differently altogether already as part of a master lease agreement, subject to an encroachment permit, of course. So I think that batching could happen as part of an encroachment permit. I don't see a problem with that.
We agree with that. That the purpose of the master lease agreement is to get authority to access many city poles at the same time. And so then the processing of the encroachment permits can also be done consistent with the overall purpose of the master lease agreement.
The comment on the fees that would be in the master lease agreement, that's negotiated at the time of the master lease agreement, not.
Well, that language is in the ordinance right now.
Can you show me where it is,
Yeah,
please?
it's on, it's sub 5B on page, so go to section 5. The easiest way to find it is actually go to almost the last page of the ordinance. Yeah, the last page of the ordinance and the Roman numeral 5. It references that each facility described shall be relocated at applicant or owner's sole cost upon demand by the city with reasonable notice to allow for public projects, services, or improvements. As I understood the comment from the speaker, he was trying to distinguish discretionary movements. I'm not exactly sure what that would mean. Our language says that if we're moving it for a public purpose and for public improvements, that they have to relocate it. That's fairly
So we've
common,
moved a
actually.
lot, we recently moved a couple of pieces just to do the Safe Routes to School project out between Walnut Acres and Foothill. There were poles that were being moved, and that was for a very, very specific public purpose. I don't think we ever wake up and decide just to move a pole. Right. We typically have a good reason to do it. Okay. But I'm going to go backward. There were 4 comments, And his third comment had to do with the master lease agreement, and there was a reference to fees, and
The standards included for processing fees and other standards.
that would
within the
be
state
all
bill.
within the negotiation and the master
Absolutely.
lease agreement. Okay.
Correct. And his comment was in reference to the limits that had been placed into
were-
SB.
that were
629,
proposed.
That were proposed and that were the bill that was vetoed by the governor.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments before
Mr.
we go
Mayor,
forward?
I do have one other. Just Ethan raised a point during the presentation that we did receive a letter from Comcast today, and Comcast, Dan, I'll hand one to you if you could pass it to me. Comcast requested an edit which would add an exemption. What you're receiving is, it will look like redlining on redlining. We apologize for that. But if you look at the blue text, that is a version of additional language. Most of that was proposed by Comcast, and we were agreeable to it. The only thing we modified was to make it clear that it would be micro wireless facilities strung from pole to pole by an existing franchisee, which is, Comcast is an existing franchisee, as is, I believe, Wave. And so this additional language is acceptable to staff if the council wants to include it in, but this came in very late, so we were able to produce it on the dais tonight, but not before. This language is very similar to what's in the letter from Comcast, and staff is okay with this language, as we've modified it.
Okay, well, you anticipated my comment. Has everybody had a chance to read that language? So, any other discussion? Can we have a motion?
First of all, I would like to say thank you to staff and thank you to the industry for being willing to talk about this. I think it's important that we streamline these. We certainly don't want to be doing 31 small cell sites one at a time, and 31 is probably only the tip of the iceberg. But I also appreciate the industry understanding the need to be concerned about the landscape of our community and what we do and don't want. So I move to introduce and waive further reading the ordinance amending Title 10 Planning and Zoning, Chapter 2, Part 3, Wireless Communication Facilities Ordinance of the Municipal Code to exempt small cell antenna facilities as well as micro wireless facilities owned or operated by an existing franchisee from provisions of the Wireless Communications Facility Ordinance, subject to certain conditions and as amended tonight at the dais.
And the amendment is both the additional language of paragraph 6
Yes.
and the other.
And the other change that was on the dais this evening, the
Correct.
corrections that were there, so.
Do we have a second?
What, I don't know if you do or don't for me. I'm asking if we've resolved the batch issue, or did we decide that that's covered in the agreement, or should it be covered by?
Well, I think Ethan has indicated we concur that we believe we can process the encroachment permits in a batch. We think it's covered by the agreement effectively because there would be a master lease agreement for all the city facilities. And so if one were to have the master lease agreement and then come in with the associated encroachment permits, they could all be, and Ethan, I need you to correct this, they could be processed together as a group.
I think each would be issued its own encroachment permit, but yes, as a group, they could be collectively processed.
Having had that question answered, I second the motion.
Okay, any comment? The only comment I'd like to make is staff to consider the comment about the requirement for a larger time for construction. And that's the other provision of the code. And if it needs to be amended, then we can address that later. Okay, why don't we call for the vote?
Councilmember Silva?
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Waddell?
Aye.
Mayor Carlston?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we're going to move to item number 5B, Energy Services Contract with Cicerco, Inc. for HVAC and lighting improvements. is this the one, Cindy?
Yes, Mayor. Because my husband is a retiree of Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and Pacific Gas and Electric Company would be providing the loan that would make this possible, I must recuse myself from this item, but I do want to congratulate staff for really looking for innovative alternatives to these types of projects.
Thank you, Council Member. Good evening, council members and Mayor Rich Carlston. My name is Jake Allred. I'm an administrative analyst with the Public Works Department. I'm here tonight to discuss the energy services contract with Sizer Co. Inc. for HVAC and lighting improvements. And I better get the clicker here. All right. So I want to start with a brief overview of what we've been talking about and then move into some of the details. So our goal here is to replace aging HVAC infrastructure as well as make some lighting improvements in various facilities that I'll discuss here in a bit. But we believe and we're recommending that the best way to do this is through an energy services contract with Sizer Co. Inc. Then I'll move on and talk about some funding sources. We will pay for this and then discuss the resolution that we're asking for council to adopt. Okay, so a little bit about the project background. Staff went to competitive RFQ, request for qualifications for energy services consultants, and Sizer Co. was the successful candidate and was entered into an agreement. Subsequently, Sizer Co. Conducted an investment grade audit of several facilities, which resulted in a comprehensive list of energy conservation measures. And those are primarily tied to the replacement of HVAC infrastructure, lighting improvements, as well as some plumbing issues that would not be part of this agreement. Based on the ECMs that were provided, staff prioritized those, working with Sizer Co. With an emphasis on choosing equipment that is in, assessing its current condition, also checking on the efficiency to be realized from upgrading that equipment, and what the biggest energy cost savings would be resulting from that. And then also identifying the funding source that would pay for those improvements. So, for example, some of the funding was specific to Lindsay Museum and to Heather Farm Gardens. So moving on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the energy conservation measures that could be completed if this would be approved by council. We'll start with City Hall. Main goal here would be to replace the 3 main air handling units, which handle conditioned air throughout the facility, as well as replacing a leaking cooling tower. Now, rather than talk at you guys and put bullet points up there, I wanted to provide some pictures because they sometimes can be worth 1,000 words of what some of the infrastructure is. It's up there. Up in the top right, you can see staff has innovated there a cover over the top of some of the coils to try to keep it cool and prolong the life of the unit and the effectiveness of it. So there's some improvements that could help here. Let's see. At Heather Farm Gardens, our plan is to replace the heat pumps that are existing. The existing heat pumps are 37 years old. This facility handles events, programming, things along those lines, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of a wedding with a bride when it's in the middle of August and your HVAC goes out. So it's one of the things we'll address there. Let's see. At Lindsay Museum, the plan would be to replace all of the HVAC equipment that's there, as well as upgrade the building management system, which controls the units and provides for comfort and also efficiency of the units. At Shadeland Civic Arts, the plan would be to replace the 2 main heat pumps that serve mainly the programmed area or the event rental area that you can see at the bottom left there. We are aware, staff is aware, that this facility is being considered as critical infrastructure and may be evaluated for renovation or replacement sometime in the foreseeable future. The fact is this facility is programmed and rented out currently, and the facility or the HVAC equipment that's there has demanded quite a bit of staff time over the last couple of years in responding to make sure that it's up and running. So it was identified as a priority for moving forward in this project. And finally, the lighting efficiency and controls upgrade would apply to the 3 parking garages that we have throughout the city, and would mostly be the replacement of all of the fluorescent lamps that are in the lighting there with LED lighting, as well as to provide a new control system to be able to monitor how much energy is being used there and be able to run it as efficiently as possible. So one of the things we're excited about with the lighting side of things, and we'll touch base on this here in a minute with regard to the financing of this project, but the lighting is a very quick return on your investment on energy savings and allows us to be able to buy down the rest of the project faster. So in summary of the energy services contract with Sizer Co., we're estimating an energy savings of around 786,000 kilowatts per year, which equates to nearly $127,000 per year in energy savings. The contract cost, the total cost for construction, project management, commissioning, monitoring, everything to get the project done as a turnkey project that hands over to the city with training on how to operate the facility or the equipment would be roughly $2.73 million. Of which, or out of that funding, or out of that cost, $1.46 million would come from the capital budget in pre-approved or already appropriated funds that are there. The council appropriated as part of the 16-18 budget. We are planning on $1.7 million of interest-free financing from PG&E's on-bill financing program, which I'll touch on here more in a second. But essentially the way that program works is it uses the energy savings realized from the improvements on the infrastructure to buy down or to pay for the project over a 10-year loan. So available funding that's here now, I just mentioned as part of the 16-18 budget, council approved $1.8 million for HVAC replacements and upgrades at various facilities, and an additional just over $700,000 for HVAC improvements at Lindsay Museum and the gardens at Heather Farm. $2.5 million is generous to the capital budget, and we are able to apply that to a lot of the energy conservation measures that we're trying to get done, but it doesn't solve all of those projects or these concerns that we have. So what we're hoping to do is find ways to stretch that money and to grow it, to leverage it to get more work done. And so one great opportunity that we have here is to take advantage of the PG&E on-bill financing alternative path program, which builds upon PG&E's in-place on-bill financing program that we have used in the past for our LED retrofits on streetlights successfully. And really what it does is it expands the amount of available funding to $4 million for the municipality, and up to $1 million per facility, although it's unlikely that we'd get to that point with any of our facilities. Some of the benefits of the program are that it is 0% interest financing, so it's not going to cost the city any money to get the money up front to pay for the project. The loan is paid back over 10 years on the improved facility's energy bill. And so, for example, if we were to save the $126,000, which is close to what we're looking at for this project, $1.26 million could go towards the upfront project costs. Another benefit of the project, or of the on-bill financing program, is that the credit line replenishes as it's repaid back, so making it available for future projects. So I thought it would be important for us to touch on some of the benefits to the city if council were to approve this. Again, I talked about the energy efficiency savings of $127,000 per year, roughly. Important to note from a staff standpoint is we'll reduce the impact on the operational budget and staff time in responding to problems with older, aging infrastructure. Also, we'll be able to leverage existing capital budget funds, and rather than spending the full $2.5 million that council has appropriated up front, we'll have some money left over there by taking advantage of the on-bill financing for the funding of the project to address future HVAC projects. Staff anticipates that if this is a successful project and council decides to move forward with this, that we may be able to expand on this program in the future to meet additional ECMs or energy conservation measures at different facilities. And for the users of the facilities, we're looking at safer, reliable, and more comfortable operations of the facilities, which is great. As a final bonus, it helps us meet some of our CAP plans, our climate action plans. So that gets me to my final slide here, which is the proposed resolution. So one of the reasons I'm up here tonight to present to you guys, in addition to being excited about a program that's going to be able to leverage some additional funds to help us get this program or this project done up front, is that this standing before council in a hearing meets the requirements of Government Code Section 4217.12, which is related to the procurement of energy services contracts. So we're not going through the standard operation of having staff design a plan for the replacement of this and then going out to low bid for the construction of it and then manage the construction. This is a turnkey project where Sizerco Inc. would then manage the project and we would manage the Sizerco consultant contract. And so in the end, what we get is a turnkey project that's handed over to staff. And we're involved in the process as we go on with not only managing the consultant contract, but having staff involved in the training and the installation of what's going on there. Also, the proposed resolution would allow the city manager to then execute the energy services contract with Sizerco and enter into an on-bill financing agreement with PG&E. So with that, I'll yield and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Jake Luella?
Yeah, I think it's important. Why would we be putting the HVAC system? I know the answer, but you should say it publicly. Why would we be putting the HVAC system on Heather Farm Garden and Lindsay Museum? Because they're not part of the city directly?
Okay, so as far as Lindsay Museum, are you referencing the? Can you just say
who owns the building and
yeah.
who has the responsibility?
So the city owns the building, and it is leased by tenants that are there. Okay. And council agreed to additional funding to help replace the infrastructure.
Okay. If we have some significant savings from that, are we keeping all the savings for the city, or are we sharing somewhat with the?
The savings would be realized on the energy bill.
And we are responsible for the energy bill.
No,
Don't have
Lindsay
the answer for
Wildlife and the Garden of Heather both pay their own energy bill, but the payback will go back into their energy bill. So, so to pay back this loan will come out of their energy bill.
Are they disadvantaged by this? Is it not? Is it?
No, they're not disadvantaged. No, I mean, technically they are supposed to be replacing those facilities, and we're doing that for them with the money that the city council approved in the general fund.
Yeah. All right. So it's neutral to them.
Yes.
Okay. Is there? You talked about a $4 million option. First of all, is there a time limit by which we can apply for this program? Is it got a drop dead date?
It's an ongoing program. There's not a time limit for us to apply for it, and the $4 million is a maximum funding limit that they give you on like a credit line. And so as you pay that down, it becomes available again.
Okay, so we're not spending in any of this that we're doing that $4 million. We're going to have the ability to pull down on that $4 million should we need to do any of these additional amounts. So it really truly is like a line of credit on your house. Okay, and that's, I think, it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Justin? I had a quick question. This has to do with Lindsay Wildlife and the gardens at Heather Farm, and it really follows up on Luella's question. Will there be some sort of a letter agreement whereby they consent to this arrangement and agree to it? I wouldn't want a situation where they get the savings, but then they decide that.
That's a good question. I'm not.
Well, can we do that?
As I understand, well, as I understand this program, the way that the cost is paid back through the energy charges on the loan over time.
Correct.
So folks who pay the energy charges are paying back a portion of the cost. So the real issue, we can look at this, I can't answer this tonight, but presumably in both of their leases, they're obligated to pay, as Heather indicated, the electric payments and the gas and electric payments from PG&E. So we don't have to amend the contract to obligate them to pay what they're already obligated to pay.
But what my question is do we have their consent to this approach? Because it does impact their lease agreement. And it does, I don't know if there's an encumbrance or a deed of trust that's put on by PG&E?
Rich, did you want to help?
Yeah. So, Rich Payne, Public Services or Public Works Manager. In terms of the utilities associated with the facility, we own the facility. We've actually had these discussions with both users, and they're aware of the savings and the programs that are a part of the onboard financing. The way this works is whatever that savings is associated with these facility improvements would go back to the financing the equipment and the projects until that onboard financing has established the 10-year buyback period, and then at that time they would the savings would be reflected in their utility bill.
Okay. It still seems to me it would be nice to have something in writing where they agree to it. It sounds like you've already talked to them and they agreed to the procedure.
They're aware of the improvements that we're making with regard to the HVAC in both facilities.
Yeah, maybe a letter or something that can be confirmed.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that point. I mean, I think your point is that it's their energy bills in which the savings are going to be realized. It would be redirected to pay for this. So how are we going to contractually ensure that that occurs and that everybody's comfortable with that arrangement? We'll follow up on that.
Okay, those are all my questions. Did you have another one, Luana?
Yeah. Does that agreement impact how we handle tonight's resolution?
I don't think so.
No, the council, I mean, the council could, as part of a motion, if you were inclined to consider approving this, you could give direction to staff to get that confirmation in writing before we execute. So we could get the authority tonight, but we'd get the confirmation. Given, as indicated, there have been conversations with both organizations already, and they're supportive of this. I don't see that would be difficult to accomplish. So.
Following up, Llewellyn, do we need to put that into the motion?
Yes,
Okay.
if yes. But it would be that the motion, if the council were going to consider it, the council would consider a motion to approve the resolution that's tonight, and that you would direct staff prior to execution of the agreements to get a written understanding with Lindsay and with the Heather Farm that they understand the implications and that the change in the electricity bill.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now it's time for public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment upon this proposed transaction? Not seeing any, I'll bring it back to council. Any further discussion? Luella, are you preparing the motion, or is Justin making the motion?
Justin volunteered. We're going to let him.
All right.
Move to adopt the resolution making findings and authorizing the city manager to execute on energy services agreement with Sirocco and to provide turnkey services for HVAC and lighting improvements at various facilities in the amount of $2.7 million and change. Execute change orders within the project contingency amount $300,000 and enter into a financial agreement through PG&E's OBF AP program with the understanding that staff will work with Lindsay and Heather Farms to get their concurrence on the funding mechanism.
Prior to execution.
Prior to execution.
Second.
Why don't we go ahead and have a roll call?
Mayor Pro Tem Waddell?
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew?
And I also want to thank staff to have kind of gotten their arms around this. This looks like a really good opportunity, and thank you, and my vote is aye.
And Mayor Carlson?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
And again, appreciation for staff and all the good work, and the fact that this is additional funding for which we're not going to have to come out of pocket with our budget.
Mr. Mayor, as we allow Ms. Silva to come back in, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute break, and we'll re-adjourn at 10 to 8. Okay, we're going to go back with our meeting, and we're now on item number 6, 2018 to 2028 10-year capital investment program. Can we have a staff report, Scott?
Thank you, Mayor Carlston, members of the council. My name is Scott Wickstrom. I'm a senior engineer with the city of Walnut Creek. I understand I'm competing with the opening night for the Warriors, so I'll try to be brief as I can be. Tonight, we have in front of you the 2018-2028 10-year capital investment program. We'll have a quick overview for the CIP. We'll talk about the process we've gone through to date and the CIP development, highlight some available funding, highlight some projects, and I will say highlight. There's 90 pages in there, 65 actual project descriptions worked out there. We will not go through each one of them individually. Recommended action tonight is to approve the 18-28 10-year capital investment program. So for some headlines, funding levels are up, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. Our asset management needs are down, or I should, sorry, the unfunded needs are down. And importantly, the critical infrastructure discussion that council is having with respect to four specific facilities is not included in this 10-year CIP. Parks and Transportation does have a fair amount of funding available to make improvements. We'll talk about that. And then the downtown parking and enhancement is struggling a little bit, and it's at a point where some decisions need to be made about how much money we invest into parking and how much money would potentially be available for downtown enhancements. So you've probably heard me say this before, but the capital investment program is a planning tool. It's a long-term planning tool with 5 two-year cycles that provides vision and defines priorities for the city. Importantly, it does not allocate funds. That is the role of the capital budget, which is a 2-year budget that runs concurrently with the operating budget. It appropriates money for specific projects, and we like to say that it's informed by the first 2-year cycle of the 10-year CIP. So the projects you see in the first 2-year CIP will be further developed and detailed as we go into the capital budget discussion early next year. I like to think of the CIP as a compilation of many components. Tonight I'm going to focus on 5 of them in particular: roadway maintenance, building facilities, downtown park enhancement, transportation projects, and then parks and open space. All those feed into the CIP, which ultimately lead to the capital budget. In past years, there's been a substantial amount of distinctions made between asset management projects versus discretionary projects. And I just want to point out for the downtown parking and enhancement grouping, I've actually deliberately combined those two because that is an enterprise fund, and they both are rolling together from the same funding source. So for the CIP process, we really started this work about a year ago. Our roadway maintenance is really an ongoing, continuous program where we get annual pavement management reports assessing the state of our roadways. They run reports about how much money we need annually to keep our roads in their existing conditions. And as a matter of course, we always have a paving plan worked out for the next 2 to 3 years. So when we had the SB1 requirement for a project list, we already had those projects already kind of largely filled out and vetted out, and we just brought them forward and made them public at that time. Our building facilities, we do annual inspections. We were out at most of our facilities last November and December. And at that time, we really were looking to review and update our maintenance master plan, making sure we're capturing the life expectancy of all the critical facilities. And we're going to start our tours again in next month in November, where we go through in a detailed process and pull out specific capital projects that will be brought forward in the capital budget. For parks and open space, Mike Vickers has been very active along with his staff, and we've gone through a couple meetings with the Pros Commission, both in April and June. Transportation Commission, Rafat and Steve Waymire have been very involved in that, and we've had a couple commission meetings with the Transportation Commission in May and July. And lastly, the downtown parking enhancement is a grouping that we continue to work on and continue to develop. It's a relatively new group, but it's something that we're working closely with Carla Hansen, Rich Payne, Carlin Larson, Jeff Jolivet, myself to kind of look at both building needs, parking needs, and also some potential enhancements in the downtown. Talking about funding for a second. Subtle but very, very significant. The long-term financial forecast that was approved by council this year made a recommendation to fund the capital budget at 2.5% of the operating revenue. That is really an increase from, I'll say, the historic but arbitrary 2.75 million that was been kind of a placeholder number for many years, to $4.4 million in this first 2-year cycle. It's a substantial increase, and particularly as you extend that over the full 10-year cycle, it makes a huge dent in our unfunded asset management needs. I think one of the things that was brought forward at that time was the recognition that as we talk about building maintenance, I'm talking about capital projects, capital replacements for building maintenance, our general fund is really the primary and only source of funds for those kind of improvements. Payment management, I was here 2 weeks ago. We talked about Senate Bill 1 and the additional funding that brings into the 18-20 cycle, and that obviously projects forward out to the rest of the 10-year CIP. We do have some grant money that we successfully applied for, and our funding total is approximately $6.8 million per 2-year cycle, and I'll come back to that dollar amount a little bit later in the presentation. So development fees, we have continued strong development, both commercially and residential, and that provides funds for transportation through the traffic impact fee and for parks with the in lieu parkland fee. And both of those funds have a fair amount of resources in them that allow us to then spend to make improvements for both traffic and for our park system. Also want to call attention to the diversion incentive fund, which is really Recycle Smart. Recycle Smart, for the money that we get for recycling cans and bottles and papers throughout the city, that money can then be reused by the agencies, the city in particular, for recycling outreach, but it could also be used to purchase recycled products that we can then use in our parks, such as park benches. It could purchase products that we could use in our buildings, such as recycled metal roofs. They have such things. And even in some instances, we're able to use some recycled carpeting in some of our lower impact facilities. It also paid for the big belly trash receptacles in the downtown, and as Jake was talking about, an opportunity to stretch our capital budget dollars. This is a great way that we've been stretching our capital budget dollars both in the building side and in the parks and open space side as well. It doesn't really show up directly in the 10-year CIP as a line item, but it's there, and it's been very helpful for us over the last couple of years. And then we want to talk briefly about the downtown parking and enhancement enterprise fund. That's a bit of a mouthful. That fund was established in 2014. It is, of course, an enterprise fund, really to look at parking predominantly in the downtown, that the revenues that are collected are used to pay for all the operations to support that parking, and also to make improvements to our parking facilities, and as the name implies, enhancing the downtown as well. Unfortunately, that fund is having a little bit of difficulty in that the revenues are currently lagging behind the budget estimates that were proposed when the fund was enacted in 2014. There is a long-term financial forecast that's in progress. It's currently working its way through the Finance Committee. They had a hearing about this in September. There will be additional hearings about that. The numbers that are in the 10-year CIP represent the most current information that I have. And one of the likely outcomes of the Finance Committee, I would expect, is that there may be a short-term reduction in funding to the capital budget from the original recommendations when the fund was established in 2014. That has been accounted for in this version of the 10-year CIP. So moving on to projects, and I'll start with the asset management categories. Really, it's a reminder of all the asset management categories that we have. Traditionally, we have not detailed out the specific projects in the 10-year CIP. We follow more of a holistic maintenance master plan program for these, and we have a separate program for our roadways. I'll talk a little more detail tonight about our building facility maintenance and also roadway maintenance to give you a little more background for those, which are two of the most important or largest sized categories that we deal with. So buildings and facilities, we do, as I mentioned before, have a maintenance master plan. All of our major facilities are identified along with our major building components: roofs, flooring, painting, both interior, exterior, HVAC, a host of those items. One of the things that's very important to keep in mind is that the building and facilities asset management category maintains the basic characteristics of the building. It does not address code compliance. It does not provide for fire systems where there aren't any currently. It doesn't address any seismic retrofits that may or may not be required in the future, nor does it explicitly address accessibility requirements such as ADA. We sometimes, as we do projects, find ourselves triggering those requirements and having to comply, but as we look to the basic MMP, those are not they're not directly included. It keeps the buildings as is. And so, you know, that's one key component. One of the things I also want to point out is that we've had a substantial amount of deferred maintenance over the last several years, and we as a group have been more and more careful to make sure we capture that level of deferred maintenance and make sure that information is brought forward. If we're partially funded in one capital budget year, a lot of those improvements that weren't done get rolled forward to the extent we can, and we assess that every time we go through on our annual inspections. So this is just a simple graph kind of showing what our building facility needs are over the next 5 two-year cycles, and really you see that there's over $3 million in each of the first 2 cycles. That reflects a fair amount of the deferred maintenance that we haven't done over the last few years. And I remember asking Rich and asking Jake, what exactly are those big items? And it's nothing major. It's a lot of roofs on a lot of smaller buildings. It's a lot of exterior paintings that need to be done. It's a lot of floorings that need to be replaced. So it's a collection of a lot of little things that add into that. We'll detail that more out as we get to the capital budget and bring that before you next year. So building and facilities, and again, I mentioned this earlier, it does not include the renovation and replacement for the ongoing critical infrastructure review. You know, when we talk about Clark Pool, it's a facility that's approaching the end of its useful life. Pools live a hard life with all the harsh chemicals and the heavy traffic and use. There's only so far you can extend that kind of a building. Heather Farm Community Center is one that we've looked at, and it's basically, unfortunately, from an era when construction standards were not quite the same as they are, and there's some construction difficulties with how that building was designed and built that make it a challenge. You know, Civic Park Community Center, it's an older facility, and it's really a question of, does it meet our current layout and programming needs for what we are doing now, and also as we look forward in the future? You know, so really, as you have this discussion that is scheduled for sometime next month, it's really a matter of long-term and future planning. What do we want the city to look like 10, 15, 20 plus years from now? Just to reiterate, those are not currently included in the CIP. They're all big ticket items. But because the discussion is running in parallel, say a little bit behind, didn't think it was appropriate to make any presuppositions about what would be the outcome of those discussions here. So pavement management, this is the nice graph I showed a couple weeks ago showing our 210 or 213 miles of roadway in color. Question was asked, how many roads, you know, I called out that all the ones that are out in red are over 20 years, or at least it's been over 20 years since our last major maintenance of that road. We're at 37 miles of roads. That's 1 in 5 of our roadways haven't really been acted on in the last 20 years. So what does it take to maintain our roads? We always, in the same manner for buildings, we look to say, what is the amount of money we need to maintain our roads at their existing condition? That's the pavement condition index. It's a measurement of the number of distress and cracking on the road. And that number turns out to be $6.8 million per 2-year cycle, $3.4 million per year. And I kind of, in bright colors here, identified various different funding sources. And I think the one that I want to call attention to is the light blue, which is a gas tax. It's the Road Maintenance and Recovery Account, also known as SB1, the recently passed tax. And if you look at it, what it does is it really is the item that fills the gap. It fills that shortfall from what we are historically seeing in our pavement funding to a level where we feel that we can begin to maintain our roads at their existing condition. So we're very excited to have that additional funding. I think it's just going to help Walnut Creek out now and into the future. So transportation system, and Timothy from CCTA earlier today had much better graphics, and he was also talking about smart connectivity. As you're talking about, yeah, his were moving. There are a lot more going on here. Rafat gave me this one here, and really to hear him tell the story, Rafat to tell the story, which is kind of what Timothy was saying earlier. One of the big issue or items in transportation is it's rapidly changing. There's a huge amount of technological innovation, and there's a lot of effort focused on not necessarily building bigger infrastructure, but using your infrastructure better and more efficiently. there's the prospect of autonomous vehicles coming. Communication is getting to be more and more important. We already have the Park Me app that you can pay for your parking meters. At some point, we might even be able to get an app that shows where our vacant spaces are. That information about traffic and traffic signals can be transmitted real time from our traffic signal to vehicles to help them out. So there's definitely a shift in focus to technology and also to multimodal types of operations. So the projects that are in the 10-year CIP, they're all selected from the TIF list, the revised and expanded TIF list that was approved by council earlier this year. They are technology related, they're multimodal related, and there are infrastructure related. And really it's a combination of all of these things that we're looking at to meet the future needs of our transportation system and the challenges that we expect to face in the future. So I do want to kind of focus on some traditional improvements that we also have as well. So this is Newell Avenue from Main Street to Broadway. Broadway Plaza recently did a fair amount of work for their facility, and as a kind of a component of their project, did a substantial widening and improvement on Newell Avenue east of Maria Lane. And if you've driven down there, ridden a bike down there, or walked down there, I think it's very obvious that the Newell Avenue Bridge is now very narrow and is basically a constriction point for that area. So one of the projects that's in here is to look at widening the Newell Avenue Bridge, which will help all modes of transportation moving forward. We also have not forgotten Ignacio Valley Road. Yes, we're going to look at technological improvements, but there are some physical improvements as well. The two lines there represent the overlap in the left turns from what's Walnut to the south or the right, and Bancroft up on the upper part of the screen. And because there's such high turning movements, those turns overlap. You can't run them at the same time. Means we have to do split phasing as opposed to combined phasing. And unfortunately, what that does is it infects the entire Ignacio Valley Road corridor. It's basically a bottleneck for the entire corridor. So we do also have projects that really focus on capacity, and there's some other Ignacio Valley Road capacity improvements as well in the 10-year CIP. I struggled a little bit as I was putting this presentation together to what to say about parks. It's hard to say what's the marquee project, so I kind of pulled up part of the presentation that went to PROS earlier in the year and identified some recently completed projects we did. I won't necessarily go through every single one of them. Additional list of projects that are currently ongoing. Again, a nice long list of many things going on. And also funded or upcoming projects. They've been funded in the capital budget. We will get to these in due time. And really, as we look at the proposed 1820 projects, there's another long list of projects going on here. And so if I was to say what is the highlight for the parks and open space, it's really that we've done significant improvements in 14 of our major parks. A lot of credit is due to the work that the PROS Commission has done in conjunction with Mike Vickers and his staff to really kind of push the envelope and get as much work as we possibly can get done. It's really remarkable the amount of work that's been done here. So it's also good to note that the PROS Commission spent a lot of time for the Park Strategic Plan in 2025 or a couple of years ago. And most of those projects have already been either funded or are programmed in the 10-year CIP. So that's a kind of a nice success to show as well. And it's also important to realize that as much as we have a lot of development in the downtown and the impacts that causes, a lot of those developments then through some of their in-lieu parkland funds allow these improvements to be constructed. So there's a benefit that comes from some of that. I did want to call out one project in particular that stands out. It's the Heather Farm Park Master Plan update. Over the course of the last couple of years, I've heard comments from our Arts and Recreation Department staff about things they'd like to have done out there, changes they'd like to see, including an additional restroom due to the success of the All Abilities Playground. There's been a bocce committee that's working its way through PROS and will eventually come to council that's recommending bocce, and unfortunately the location for bocce in the 2003 master plan has already kind of been occupied by the maintenance yard at Heather Farm. There's a question of relocating the basketball facilities and where exactly those would go. So there's a number of issues that pertain to Heather Farm Park. It is our most heavily used park. And, you know, since the update was last done in 2003, we think it's time and appropriate to really relook at the plan, engage the community, and how we want to best utilize our most heavily used park. As you talk about both the Heather Farm Park Master Plan, one of the other funded and ongoing projects is the Civic Park Master Plan. In the 10-year CIP, we have placeholders, if you will, or earmarking funds in future cycles for potential future improvements. It's not having gone through the master plan process, we can't say specifically what those improvements are, but we're just basically earmarking that those are important, critical parks that we expect to do some funding for those future improvements based on the outcomes of these studies. So downtown parking and enhancement. I'll start with the parking component. So the parking garages have been removed from the building MMP. So as we do our buildings, years ago we had them included in there. Since the enterprise fund in 2014, we pulled them out and separated them. So all of the building maintenance and needs for the parking garages, in addition to any requirements for the on-street parking, are now handled through the enterprise fund. And, you know, examples of some of the 1820 projects that are identified is Locust Street elevator rehabilitation, a new parking management system to basically replace our one that's about 8 to 9 years old and is kind of towards the end of its useful life. Our parking meters are also approaching the end of their useful life, and we're looking to go for an RFP for new parking meters, and there's a lot of new technologies out there that can basically help both us and also, if you will, the customers who are parking. And you know, electric vehicle charging stations are in demand, and so we have some money in there to expand the use of those as well. So if we want to talk about enhancement, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes here talking about enhancements, just to kind of differentiate what are the possibilities that we can have for this fund. It's really an opportunity for reinvestment and renewal in our downtown. It's a funding source that potentially provides opportunities for that. So what you see up here is Locust Street. It used to be Massimo's. On the sign there it says Macbeth. But across the street from the parking garage, this used to be the crosswalk that pedestrians would cross the street and come across to. It's not very inviting. We had a project that had grant funding to install the flashing beacons at this crosswalk. We expanded that project through the use of the downtown parking fund to basically build out the entire plaza and create a more welcoming environment for pedestrians crossing the street, and I'll say a much safer environment because there's a lot more separation from the parked cars. It's a lot more visible. So these are the type of enhancements that are possible with the downtown parking fund. Some other possibilities, and I'll just be brief on these, is you know, our decorative crosswalks were built some time ago. If you look at them carefully, there's some settlement. They need a little bit of work done on those. Our sidewalks, this picture is a little bit washed out, but we have some trees. The trees are beautiful. You can see I'm an engineer. I don't even look at the crown of the tree. I'm looking down at the bottom and what it's doing to our sidewalk and to our curb and gutter there. We need some work. We need to replace the tree and rebuild some of these sidewalks. And then there's even possibility for intersection upgrades. This is Main and Cypress, I believe. And to note is the traffic signal that's on a concrete pole right in the middle of our crosswalk that precludes us from doing necessary ADA accessibility upgrades for our curb ramps and the required ped push buttons. None of these improvements that I kind of showed here are really fully captured in our current MMP. And there's limited funding options. I mean, I'll say that Steve Waymeyer's been talking about wanting to improve this intersection for 15 years now and hasn't really found the opportunity and the funding, if you will, to execute on that. So another enhancement project that we have on here is the Locust Street streetscape. This is a much broader vision. It started out with a recognition that the pavement on Locust Street is old. It needs repaving. If we're going to invest, I'll say several hundred thousand, close to $1 million in asphalt, might we take the opportunity to look at some other constraints that we have at Locust Street? I'll show one here. This is a restaurant on Locust Street. The one red arrow pointing across the sidewalk shows the cross slope, which is well in excess of 4%, which is more than is allowed on an accessible pathway. It's an existing condition. However, when building owners come in and do their tenant improvements, we require them to provide a level landing outside their door. So if you look at this arrow here at the right, you can see some work that the building owner had to do along with some concrete work in the public right-of-way just to meet the building code requirements for their tenant improvement. There's an opportunity for us as a city, if we go and look at Locust Street, to correct a lot of these cross-slope issues as we'd go through and repave the street if we were looking at a much larger scoped project. Here's a third example. This is the old Bonanza Books. It's the piano store now, and it just kind of shows a similar thing where we have some cross-slope issues. The subway has a step coming out of its door, and we have some old, tired hardscape that just needs some refreshment and some renewal. So, you know, what is the project? It's really looking at potentially from La Casa to Mount Diablo, or most certainly from Civic to Mount Diablo, sidewalks, parking, landscape hardscaping, paving, and even some utilities that, such as Central San, I know has to upsize some of their line for their sanitary. We get that in at the same time. The capital budget approved money for conceptual planning. We expect to start that work this fall and early into December, and it will include public outreach to the business community in Walnut Creek downtown. You know, one of the questions comes is this is an ambitious project. It's really a downtown renewal project. How do we fund that? And maybe the Downtown Park Enhancement Fund is one option. So getting close to wrapping up. Back to headlines. Again, our funding levels, we've got more money. Our asset management needs as a result of that funding is down. Critical infrastructure we're not talking about so much, you know, and then parks and then downtown parking enhancement. So our recommended action tonight is to adopt the resolution approving the 10-year CIP, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Scott, for the presentation. Do we have questions? Do you want to go first again, Cindy, or do you want Luella to go first? Oh, we're all glad to hear that, Cindy.
Well, you said you wanted to make the rest of the game. Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you. This is getting clearer and clearer every 2 years. I appreciate the recognition of the Diversion Incentive Fund and the availability of those funds. And just so I am clear, when we use those funds, it basically preserves if we use them on a parks project, it preserves the park in lieu funds. And if we would use them on a transportation project, it would preserve the transportation funds.
That is correct.
I have to ask a technical question. There is a summary table where it says reappropriate for 2018-2020, and it's on the detail table for 2018-2020. It's in the column referencing the downtown parking fund. I have, in the number of times I've seen these, I have never seen a suggestion of reappropriation in the CIP. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Certainly, and this is, unfortunately, we're in the middle of the long-term financial forecast for the downtown parking fund. At the September hearing, a question came up from Councilmember Waddell about the capital budget, and if there was limited funds and a reduction of funds, would we have enough money to move forward with necessary and needed projects? Without having gone back and answered his question directly as part of the Finance Subcommittee, I've done the best I can here within this document. It's a recognition that we do have some existing funded capital budget projects that we would recommend reprioritization for and reappropriation for a higher and more purposeful need. Examples are, one of them in particular is we have money in the capital budget for painting the Broadway garage. And if we're going to weigh the functionality of an operating elevator versus an aesthetic improvement such as painting the Broadway garage, we would recommend to reappropriate that funds as well as the parking management system. So we have identified, I think I have 725,000 in there of potential projects. The details on that are really a capital budget discussion because that's when the actual the decisions about transferring funds or reallocating funds are done. There'll be much more specifics that come forward during the capital budget. we don't like to come and show the first 2 years of the 10-year CIP with a significant amount of unfunded projects. We're going to be talking about them in a few months. We want to make sure we have
All right,
funding
so the
identified.
projects that are listed in the 2018-2020 timeframe for the Downtown Parking Fund, staff's perspective is that these projects are more important than a few that may have been already funded.
That is correct.
Thank you. Page 4 of the appendix, the roads, there's a table there that, this is the first time that we have not had unfunded needs in roads year over year over year, which is truly wonderful because we can get this backlog of work done, as you've mentioned. But what happens in a year in which what we're projecting for our needs at $6.8 million, that our revenue streams exceed that?
The basis for the pavement management is to maintain our PCI at 75. We can always spend more, we can always spend less. And
So we could put an additional
we would
section of road in if there was additional revenue available that year.
And if we did it over the course of many years, our PCI would begin to increase and our average condition of our roads would improve.
Thank you. On page 30, this is a section, this is the Walker Avenue sidewalk into San Miguel to Sierra intersection. Can you explain what was originally proposed and funded in the last capital budget and then what we believe we will now be able to do? It's Walker Sierra, San Miguel Walker Sierra.
To be clear, nothing was funded in the past capital budget, but there was, and there has been discussion about a grant application to improve Walker Sierra, both sides of the street, north and south, east or west, depending on how you want to look at it, from the Iron Horse Trail all the way to Sierra Drive. And a grant application was done with CCTA as part of a coordinated call for grants, along with the OBAG grants. We found out from CCTA that we were not successful in receiving that full amount of funding. However, they did have, I'll say, a limited amount of remaining funds after other projects were funded in the amount of $98,000, to which we said, sure, we'll take that. And the project really at this point has been reduced to look at pedestrian and traffic channelization improvements from the Iron Horse Trail to San Miguel Drive and Margarito Zone, that whole area there. So we basically had to reduce the scope largely as a result of not receiving the full funding amount that we requested in our grant application.
Now, as I recall, we did quite a bit of work at that Iron Horse Trail crossing maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Where we did the bulb outs and the signalization,
Yep,
essentially.
and the flashing beacons.
Okay, thank you. On the very next page, it talks about pedestrian improvements, and these are really non-signalized crosswalks. Do you recall which ones we've already done in the last couple of years and then where we think we're going in the next couple of years? Because these are really, if there's one thing people come up and talk to us about at the farmers market, it will be to tell us about pedestrian challenges, particularly in the downtown area.
So ones that we've done recently and been completed, Locust Street, there's 2 new flashing beacons that have been installed. There's also one on Main Street by Arroyo. Staff has put other additional ones on Mount Diablo. They did this a few years back at the mid-block crossing by what used to be H&M. I'm not sure what store is there now. So there's been a number that have been installed. We're currently out in contract to install 4 additional flashing beacons on Civic and Carlbach, Civic and Arroyo, California and Cole, and then also at San Luis and Conejo, where it's not the Iron Horse Trail, it's the Canal Trail crosses that road. So we're currently under contract to install those. Those will be installed within the next couple of months, depending on lead times for some of the equipment. So that'll be installed shortly. Moving forward, we have a couple identified. One of the tricky crossings is at Hillside Avenue, where the on-ramp is for the 24 highway on-ramp there. It's an unsignalized crossing. It's a dangerous crossing because people are accelerating to get on the freeway. So that's one. We're also looking at a location on Broadway as you enter the North Broadway garage. That kind of I'll say coming from the southbound side, there's kind of a high-speed spur kind of going there, and it's not very clear where the pedestrians should be, so that's one. We do maintain a list of all the unsignalized crosswalks in the city with a scoring and a ranking, so there's additional facilities that we'll be looking at and pulling from those lists, and that's done in conjunction with Rafat and some of his recommendations.
Thank you very much. And I have about 3 questions related to parks and open space. Do you want to answer them, or would you want to defer to Mike Vickers?
I'll try, and then maybe I'll call Mike up.
The first, thank you for the clarification on the Heather Farm Master Plan and where we might be going with that. What has happened at LaRue, and what will the additional monies be looking to fund?
So for LaRue Park, we went through a public process with pros commissioners, neighbors, and staff members as well, and basically did a I'll say brainstorming, but a blue dot exercise where you look at different opportunities for what improvements could be done and the vision for the park. That information came back to council, and there's a recommendation for a first phase, which is really lower key, where we're installing trails, potentially improving a parking lot on site, and doing some landscaping upgrades up on the top. One of the big discussions about was whether or not there should be a restroom included in the project. And restrooms, unfortunately, are very expensive. They require a water connection, a sewer connection, and the buildings themselves are fairly expensive. So what's proposed in the phase 2 is actually at the recommendation of council at that hearing is to basically install a restroom at that LaRue Park.
And what's happening with Civic Park and the master planning process, and where is that going?
I think I'm going to let Mike speak to that one. There you go. Here he is.
While he's coming up, can I ask you one question? The Downtown Parking Enhancement Fund, and then I had 10 questions. You mentioned that we're seeing lower funds available. Does the CIP reflect the lower funds available?
It does, based on the most current information we have, and granted the Finance Committee hasn't completed their work, nor they brought it to the council, so they could modify their recommendations, but at the moment it's reflective of our most current
Of the
information.
dollar values?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mike Vickers, Park and Open Space Manager.
Civic Park, master plan.
Oh, Civic Park Master Plan. So
It is nice to have you here.
Thank you. With the $350,000 that was appropriated in the 16-18 capital budget, we've moved forward, put out an RFP seeking consultants to help us through the process. That process concluded about 2 weeks ago. We received 8 SOQs, and we're going to be selecting a consultant hopefully within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Once the consultant's on board, we'll better define the scope. We'll be reaching out to the pros commissioners, some of the other departments, bringing that information together, presenting it to council, and then we'll start the public process after that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you have more questions, feel free. I mean,
they were nits.
Okay. Luella, any questions?
No, Cindy took them all.
Justin? I had just a couple of questions. The critical infrastructure is not included within the CIP, but is the renovation and upkeep included within this?
Upkeep is included. Renovation's an interesting word, but upkeep is included in this, which is to say we're always going to have a roof on there. We're
Maintenance and
always
upkeep.
Maintenance and upkeep. Yes, maintenance and upkeep, yes.
Those are included?
Yep.
Okay. I noticed that there are a number of these larger projects, like the Locust Street Streetscape, that don't indicate that there's any funding available. Is there any anticipation of when that type of project would occur, or is it strictly dependent on funds?
It's largely dependent on funds. Again, this is a planning tool. It represents what our priorities are. It represents what opportunities may be out there for us as well. The parking fund is a as you'll hear about in the coming weeks and months, has the opportunity to raise revenues. It also has challenges with raising revenues. And so there are opportunities for funding that, but to show it as an unfunded project recognizes its value and its importance to the city and what it could do. It won't get built if there's no money, though.
Okay, and I had a quick question about the in lieu funds with respect to the parks. Are those funds, if we wanted to, available to be contributed to a future swim pool?
Yes, they are. And it was one of the recommendations of the Pros Commission that we do set aside a small amount of those in lieu parklands funds for the pool. It is, the pool being a large and expensive project could take all of the park in lieu funds and basically prevent or limit the amount of improvements that are done on other parks. But yes, you can certainly use those funds for the pool.
And likewise, some of the funds that relate to streets could be used in conjunction with the parking lot for the swim pool. Is that right?
No, you cannot. So
okay.
The gas tax funds and the Measure J are very specific that they have to be used for public roads. In our asset management category, there's a parking lots category. It's to account for off-street parking lots, so it's different. So no, you cannot use roadway funds for that.
Okay. Those are my questions. So unless there are others, we'll open it up for, let me first check, are there any other questions? We'll open up for public comment. Not seeing any members of the public. We're going to close public comment, and we're going to bring it back to the council for discussion. Before you go, why don't we, since this went through the Finance Committee, why don't we first get the comments from the Finance Committee people? So, Luell, you want to go first? Is this what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we really focused on the parking thing. Didn't we defer the whole, or was I so busy running the meeting I forgot to pay attention? We did talk about it. We agreed that it was well thought out. We spent a lot of time on the parking fund because it wasn't living up to our expectations. There were changes in what our technology could do, which severely limited the amount of income that we get from the parking fund. For example, in the old days, you were limited to how long you used the parking space up to 2 hours. And then if you left, it reset, and we got sometimes double money for the same spot that isn't in existence anymore. So that severely limited our dream horizon on what we could accomplish with that fund. Justin, you have anything to add?
Not on that topic, no.
Cindy, comments?
Well, first I want to thank staff. This is a long process every 2 years, but it's a very important process. And when I joined the council 11 years ago, we were doing maybe it was a 4-year horizon. It wasn't a 10-year horizon. And it has taken a lot of work on staff's part to be able to get us to that long-term vision. And I think this really reflects also the vision of what we need to do in our transportation arena and in our parks and open space arena, as well as let's maintain our roads and the facilities that we own. We are very fortunate with the passage of SB1 to be able to get at these road issues. And I look forward to approving this because I think it's balanced and really reflects the broad-based needs of the community.
Justin?
I too want to thank staff. I know how much time and effort gets put into this, and I think the quality of your presentation tonight reflects how prepared you are to not only address us as leaders of the community, but also the issues that are ahead of us. I'm very happy that this council made the decision in the long-term financial plan, and hopefully continues the thought process behind contributing the 2.5% to these types of projects, as you reflected, or as you stated. I think that goes a long way to ensuring that we hopefully work our way out of past mistakes and underfunding of these of our critical infrastructure. I too look forward to working with my fellow council members to ensure that as we go through the budgeting process, not only on for the CIP but also for the enterprise fund, that we look for innovative ways to ensure that we not only keep up with our infrastructure today but also provide for continuing to ensure that it keeps up for the programs that we're going to provide tomorrow.
I too agree that this was a monster job, and you really explained it very well. I appreciate it very much, Scott. We have some challenges in terms of we essentially kind of have an elephant in the room, and that's the critical buildings that we're looking at. And I feel badly in the scheme of things that we promised one of the projects a significant sum of money and then pulled it back, did a bait and switch, and sent it on to what we considered a higher priority amount. And I would very much like to see all of these critical infrastructure things considered seriously. The real problem is, as you and we all know, we don't have a lot of extra money to do what we need to do to keep our city up to the standard that we have gotten used to. And we're going to have to think about a lot of things. We're going to think about how we do everything. We're excited about the savings and the way you marshal our funds. We're excited about all of this other stuff. But I think we're back to beginning to talk about other ways to raise money to accomplish what we need to do to keep Walnut Creek the special place it is. All of the projects in this are necessary and amazing, and I personally am especially looking forward to the bocce ball courts.
Okay, let me just take a minute. I want to thank the Finance Committee for the work that you've done in conjunction with the CIP. I think it's invaluable. I want to thank Scott and your staff, first for your very clear presentation, second for the very clear 10-year capital investment program with the numerous charts that really identify the various projects, including their funding sources. So from a practical perspective, this was extremely helpful to me, and it seems to improve each time I see this thing. Again, I want to compliment the staff and the work that's been done by virtually all the departments in conjunction with this, and I look forward to addressing these issues and the financing and the funding of these issues in the future. But again, thank you very much. So, any other comments?
Mr. Mayor, I do have one. Staff has realized that the CIP, even though it was distributed to the council and was very thoroughly discussed in the report, it's referenced as an exhibit to the resolution, but it's actually not in the online agenda packet. And so we thought if the council is okay with it, we would bring the item back on your next consent calendar for action where we could include the attachment with it. So it would be there.
I don't have any problem with that. Does anybody else have a problem with it? So why don't we do it that way, particularly since it wasn't attached. I think we have finished item number 6, and the next regular meeting is November 7, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting tonight.